Well, the book was written with the purpose of informing beginning level social work students, either the bachelor's level or the master's level, who are taking a social policy foundation course. And so it was written with them in mind. And towards that end, any faculty who's teaching in a BSW policy class or MSW policy class foundation class, they'll find this book useful. Its scope, its focus, and the theoretical frameworks that it uses. So in terms of its scope, it's a historical analysis. That's one thing that makes it broader. And then it doesn't just look, for example, at social welfare. It includes other frames. So we look at criminal justice, we look at housing, we look at healthcare, we look at the labor market, we look at immigration, child welfare. So it's a broad brush look at social policy inequality. Also, the theoretical frameworks we use conflict theory, and we use critical race theory. And we do this through the lens of intersectionality. So we look at these social inequalities through this policy lens, but through the lens of gender, race, socioeconomic class, immigration status. So the intersection of all these identities and how they're impacted by social policy and social policy inequality, this is what makes it different in terms of its scope and breadth and theoretical frameworks used. So it's a historical text that brings us into contemporary times. So the historical content hasn't changed. What has changed is that I've updated much of the contemporary information. So, for example, we've just finished 4 years of the Trump administration in presidency, passed a lot of executive orders around immigration. So the book has that information. We're still in the middle of a COVID pandemic. And so in the healthcare chapter, there's coverage on how COVID has impacted communities, and particularly communities of color. And that's a theme in the book, right? The ways in which inequality is exacerbated by social policy, and COVID has kind of shone really brightly in terms of that. So that's in the book. In the criminal justice section, for example, there's now a focus on juvenile justice. There's a piece on that that was missing from the first edition. And just basically updating all of the information in the second part of the book, which really looks at very specific areas of inequality. Yeah, as a historical text, in my experience with students taking social policy, particularly when it has a historical lens to it, students tend not to find why it matters in contemporary life. What I think this book can help instructors do is to frame contemporary issues, but to look at those issues, how they began, right? We didn't just get here, how did we get here? So I think if anything, what instructors can do is can use this book to help students frame contemporary issues. What were the genesis of these problems? What are the themes? How have things changed? What worked? What didn't work? And how did we get here? I think if this book is useful, it is through that lens, being able to contextualize contemporary problems with this historical lens. Use the timelines. Again, just to revisit, there's sometimes a resistance to history. What's the point of history? But in the second part of the book, there are timelines for each of the areas that are covered. And I think that those timelines are extremely useful in helping students to contextualize the social issues of the day. So what you will find is it will begin at the beginning. In many instances, for example, it will begin in colonial America, and you'll see the way in which this policy or policies have changed over a period of time, who's been impacted by those policies. So I think that if they use the timelines, it will be a good way of seeing what I often tell students, that all that is old is new again, right? That there's nothing new, that all of this has been in the mill. And the timelines are a really great way of situating contemporary issues.